In this lesson, we'll continue painting more blood for our zombie. Okay, so in between lessons, I went in and I actually just moved this over a little bit more closely to our zombie, just because the closer it is here, the more we'll be able to paint down next to his body, because you can see whenever I click this white line is basically the border for where we can't paint anymore. So the closer it is to his body, we can paint over here all day long. So that's just going to make it a little bit easier on us. And you can rotate it back a little bit if you need to. Just kind of make sure you have enough room down here to get as much painting inside of that white border as you want to. So let's go ahead and just add a second Roto Paint node. So I'll just hit the Tab key and type in Roto Paint. And we'll drop that in just right after our first Roto Paint. And I'm going to clear out that transform because I don't want to accidentally grab that and move it without wanting to. So we'll just grab our clone tool again and Control click and drag to get a little bit farther away from that sampling area. And you just want to make sure you're breaking up any patterns that you notice. Now we're going to go in, even if this starts to look a little too painterly, we're going to go in and edit it by smearing it some and just changing it up. So don't worry if yours, looks a little scribbly. That's totally fine. Mine's going to look like that too before we start to change things. So we're just kind of painting along here to get that to go all the way off screen. And let's also move back again and see if we need to add back in that part right up here. We need a little bit of a hump in that blood. So we'll come up here and just kind of draw a little line where we need that to be. Just like this. Okay. So it's nice that that looks pretty irregular. I really am liking the way that that looks. All right, so now we've got that main part of our stain in place. And you can't really see what's underneath him because his movement, doesn't really go far enough. So that's perfect. Let's also go back in here and make sure all of those frames that were created on frame 100 are set to a all frame lifetime. Okay, so now when we scrub, that's a little bit easier to tell what's going on. Perfect. Okay, so now let's add, this looks a little too clean of a line right here. So let's add something like, almost like maybe his hand got in it, maybe a little bit of blood ran out in front of him and his hand smeared it or something. So we'll go ahead and just kind of start sampling this kind of over to the side like this. Just some little pieces like that. And then we'll come in here and grab your smear tool and let's make this a little bit bigger, about 30. And I'm going to turn the hardness all the way up to 1 because I want this to be a pretty good size of a smear. So you can see how we can just start kind of taking that and almost making it look like his hand actually smeared through this. So I'm just kind of using a wavy brush movement and kind of going back and forth over it. So it looks like he was, kind of struggling to crawl through this area. And honestly, if you didn't want to clone it, you could probably do a lot of the work using this smear tool. And if you get worried that it looks a little bit too blurry, don't worry. We've also got a sharpen tool that we can go in and kind of crisp up those edges if they get to looking a little bit unrealistic by being too blurry. And the key here is to get it looking pretty, just varied. You get some strokes that are going in a few different directions. That's what we want. Okay, now let's sharpen this up a little bit. So I'll come in here. It's right underneath or right above the smear tool. And you can just kind of paint that over. And you see how those blurry edges get a lot more refined looking. And then you could come back in with your smear if you wanted some of them to be a little bit more blurry, maybe down here. There we go. And also you have control over how opaque this is. So you could go into the merge that we created and you could turn down the mix a little bit if you wanted to. So maybe you can see some of the concrete through this a little bit still. Okay, so he's losing a lot of blood. This is looking pretty good. So now what we want to do is start to create a few other pieces that are going to be just in the area where his guts kind of swing out here towards the end. So one more thing we got to remember to do over on this side is to select all your frames that were created on frame 100. So that'd be to right about there, and set them to all frames. Okay. So now if we scrub backwards, we're not going to lose any information. Now this looks a little bit strange right here. We don't really want the rotoscope doing that. So you can just go back in and either smear, or you could erase this a little bit if you don't want it to come up that far. It's going to be easier just to paint a second rotoscope that kind of takes care of this area because it's going to be animated. So it would be better just not to have quite so much right there. And we want to make sure we go in there and tell that eraser to be on all frames. See, that looks a little bit better instead of having that rotoscope reveal it. That's not very realistic. Okay, so let's go ahead and come back here to our, let's see, probably one where it really swings out kind of far, right in here. And we'll drop in another RotoPaint node, so you can do that from right there with your draw nodes. And this one got a little off what we wanted, so just drop that on there. There we go. And so this RotoPaint is what we're going to use to paint this area right here. So grab your clone tool, control drag, and we'll just paint a little bit kind of out here and underneath him. And let's go into your lifetime and turn that to all frames. Looks like this is a little bit repetitive, so we can just paint over that. Set it to all frames. And it's okay that this part is being covered up because the way we're going to animate it will fix all of that issue. Okay, so maybe add a little bit more right in there. Make sure that these two are set to all frames. And I'm just kind of scrubbing through here to see where else do the guts swing out past the point that we have our blood painted. So right in there we need a little bit more. And make sure you set that to all frames. And there as well. Okay, so now we've got this kind of painted in, and we'll be able to use this animated as a texture in a few lessons. But first, I also want to create another RotoPaint node that we're going to use to kind of create a gush of blood at the end. So just so we're not getting confused, this RotoPaint 5, let's go into the node tab, and on the label we'll type guts drag blood. Okay, and then on 4 we'll call this one ground blood 2, and I'll just copy this because on this previous one, RotoPaint 3, we'll go into the node tab and just call it ground blood 1. Okay, so that's going to help you keep those a little bit more straight, what is what. And then we'll drop in one more RotoPaint node here. And let's kind of create a bigger blood stain that sort of drains off over here that almost looks like it gushes out here at the very end. So we can use our clone tool yet again, control drag that out, And we'll just kind of create a little puddle. Comes out like this. And you want to make sure that if you're only looking at this RotoPaint node, so you can toggle to it by hitting the number 2 key, that you are getting the right amount of blood here. Now you probably actually want to toggle to this transform so it doesn't move over time. Okay, so we'll go back to 1. And just holding control, I'm going to reposition this slightly. So this is just going to start to look like the blood is kind of coming out from here. And then I want to have just a little bit of a smear so it's a little less opaque on the edges. So I'll just kind of pull that out. Let's make this a little bit larger, maybe even a little bit more than that, maybe somewhere around 40. And just pull those edges. You need to have a little bit harder brush as well. There we go. So you see how this is kind of starting to make the edge of it look not quite so opaque. Okay, so what's going to happen is this will kind of gush out towards the end, and that's really going to just help to add to that blood looking a little more realistic. Okay, so now that we've got those RotoPaint nodes in place, we probably want to name this last one, and we'll call this one Blood Gush. And then in the next lesson, I want to show you how, if we want to, let's say maybe add some highlights into this blood to maybe look like some of the areas have maybe a little bit of some surface tension that's kind of reflecting back. If we add those in and then we try to smear them on top of this, then we're going to get an issue where the blood underneath is being smeared too. And that might not be what you're looking for. You might want to have just those highlights smeared. So you can actually add a RotoPaint node in and then merge it so that it's not affecting all the RotoPaint nodes underneath it. So I'll show you how to achieve that in the next lesson.